On New Year's Eve, James' first love had a miscarriage. In order to take care of her, he brought his first love to our home and spent the spring festival with us. He said, "I've owed her so much over the years. It's my decision to bring her home and take care of her. I'm informing you. Not asking for your opinion." He said that the position of his wife should have belonged to his first love and told me not to act coy after getting a good deal. I nodded and said, "Thank you for the notice. Out of gratitude, I've decided to give up the position of Mrs. James to her." After signing the divorce agreement, he said with red eyes that I was the only one who could be his wife. On the day James' first love returned to the country, he came to inform me without any emotion. "Sophia had a bad encounter with someone abroad and had a miserable life. Now she's in poor health, and I'm going to bring her back to recuperate. Back then, she couldn't bear to see me become a sinner in the family, so she reluctantly went abroad. Over the years, besides love, you've lived a very wealthy life with fine clothes and delicious food by my side. I've owed her so much over the years. Whether you accept it or not, I'm informing you. Not asking for your opinion." I looked up at him. His eyes were cold and distant, and upon closer inspection, there was even a hint of hostility. After being married for 4 years, he still remained on guard against me. Then, "Thank you for informing me." James seemed a bit surprised. His lips moved, but in the end he didn't say anything. He has always been a man of few words to me. After he left, I applied for aid work in the mountainous area. He thought I was used to a life of luxury and couldn't bear hardships. Before leaving, I just needed to sort out my marital issues. 4 years ago, James' family was on the verge of bankruptcy. James' father knew that I had a crush on James and took the initiative to propose a marriage alliance. At that time, I didn't know that James had a first love, so I didn't object. Until James went on a hunger strike. I secretly went to see him. The look in his eyes towards me was only coldness and distance. "I don't love you." Those 4 short words put an end to my dream. I knew that a forced relationship wouldn't be sweet. So I chose to respect him and took the initiative to propose canceling the engagement to set him free. This also led to my parents' furious outburst. I was grounded. My parents told me that in a family like mine, I could fool around with anything except marriage. On the 7th day of my being grounded, James came to see me. He didn't look well. Afraid that he would misunderstand, I, who is usually carefree, actually got so nervous that my hands and feet were sweating. I stammered and explained to him, "I've proposed to cancel the engagement, but let's get married." He interrupted me. This was supposed to be the most important thing in my life. There was no emotion on James' face, as if he was asking how much this cabbage cost. The last bit of my reason kept me sober. "Why?" He lowered his head, looking pained. After a long while, he gave an answer that didn't address the question. "She's gone and will never come back." My mother told me that Sophia had accepted a check from James' mother, blocked James, and chose to go abroad. At that time, James was starving to death in his room. At this moment he hated his first love. Looking at James with tears in his eyes. Even though I knew he didn't love me, I still couldn't help but nod. After all, I was young and full of pride, believing that one day he would surely discover my goodness. Just like that, we got together. We went to work and came off work together. James' company also rose again with the help of my family. We were inseparable, and our careers were booming. Our wedding came naturally. At the wedding, James promised me that he would treat me well for the rest of his life. He would bring me gifts when he went on business trips. He would accompany me to visit my parents during holidays. He would always hold my hand in public. In front of others, we seemed very affectionate. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. He slept in the study at night. Once, when he was drugged, I helped him into the room. His eyes were bloodshot and he called out softly, "Mima." My heart warmed, and I leaned closer to him. But he suddenly grabbed my hair and dragged my head towards the floor. In an instant, pain enveloped me. I had nowhere to run. James, who had always been kind to me, gritted his teeth and said, it's all your fault. If it weren't for you liking me, my father wouldn't have forced me to marry you. Sophia wouldn't have pretended to accept the check to make me give up and gone abroad alone to have a bad encounter with someone. There was nothing but hatred in his tone. At this moment, I realized that he hated me. After 4 years, I still couldn't win his heart. The pain and grievance made my tears flow uncontrollably. James suddenly let go and covered his face, crying bitterly. How could you be so impulsive and get married? Who else in this world can love you as much as I do? Now that I've become powerful, you're already someone else's wife. You said you didn't want to ruin my happiness, but you're my happiness. It turned out that he was so out of control tonight because his first love got married. He was drunk and not sober. I held back my emotions. And my body was trembling. Get some rest, and I'll make you some sobering up soup. The moment I closed the door, my tears flowed down like a waterfall. When I went back with the sobering up soup, James had already fallen into a deep sleep. The next day, after James sobered up, he regained his gentle and refined appearance. When he noticed the bruise on my forehead, he looked at me nervously. What happened? Does it hurt? No matter how much it hurt, it wasn't as painful as my heart. I shook my head. It doesn't hurt. I accidentally bumped into something when I got up to drink water at night. His brows furrowed. He called the family doctor to bring some medicine and applied it to me himself. Looking at his cautious appearance, I once suspected that everything last night was just a dream. He didn't mention a word about Sophia. When he was sober, he would never lose his temper with me. He would only smile at me. But his smile didn't reach his heart. Everyone said that I was lucky to have him, as he had a good and stable personality. I couldn't tell others about this feeling of powerlessness. It was like punching at cotton. All I could do was convince myself. His first love got married. I'm sure I can wait until he changes his mind. But Sophia had an unhappy marriage. She met a man who was violent towards her. The most serious time, he beat her until she had a miscarriage. It was also this time that made James fly abroad personally and give her a large sum of money, finally enabling Sophia to get a divorce successfully. That night, James didn't come back. Early the next morning, I was going to the company to make the handover. But my assistant told me that James had hired a new secretary. I frowned, and a bad premonition instinctively rose in my heart. As we were talking, a woman dressed fashionably and wearing delicate makeup walked towards us. She greeted me with a beaming face. Hello, my name is Sophia. It's my first day at work today. I had stayed up all night, with a plain face and a tired look. In contrast to her glowing face, I didn't say anything. She got closer to me and had an affectionate expression. We're so fated. How about having lunch together at noon? It's on me. Without asking for my opinion, she continued. Is something light okay? I can actually eat spicy food, but my stomach hasn't been feeling well recently, and my husband won't let me. Husband? She had clearly already divorced. We both knew very well who the husband she was talking about was at this moment. I turned serious and wanted to ask for clarification. Who is your husband? What's his name? She didn't expect me to question her directly. And her smile froze. She said awkwardly, my husband, you don't know him. In that case, let's invite our husbands to have a meal together next time. It's on me. As a gesture of hospitality. Sophia's face turned a bit pale. Okay? She was on the verge of crying. I'm going back to work now. My assistant looked at me, hesitating several times. Finally, she couldn't hold back anymore and looked at me with a look of pity. Miss Sue, I saw her get out of James' car this morning. Be careful. Be careful? I had already lost this battle from the very beginning. Who could resist the power of a first love? I thought Sophia was doing it on purpose to arouse my suspicion. As it turned out, I was too naive. As soon as I got to the office, James pushed the door open and stared at me furiously. I've already said that Sophia's not in good health since she just returned to the country. If you have any dissatisfaction, come at me. Don't target her. Me? James then asked me a soul-stirring question. I've already given you the status of my legal wife. What else are you not satisfied with? I know you're angry that I let her join the company, but Sophia just came back to the country, and the only person she can turn to for help is me. His eyes were wide with anger. She also has depression. Can't you be more understanding of her? So, he believed that I was causing trouble for Sophia. So he didn't trust me. Then, is my explanation still of any use? Seeing that I was unmoved, his anger intensified. You're in the wrong about this. Go and explain to Sophia that you're being petty and deliberately targeting her. Sophia has a kind heart and will forgive you. I stared at his face without blinking, trying to find even a trace of apology. There was none. He had a serious expression. After a sharp pain in my heart, I suddenly calmed down. An apology is out of the question. Nema. I interrupted him. If I don't apologize, are you going to fire me or divorce me? He looked astonished, and then anger followed. Meh. I didn't expect you to be so narrow-minded. He looked disappointed. If I had known it would be like this, I really regret that. It's still not too late to regret now. He looked at me in disbelief. Most likely because it was the first time I had contradicted him. I had a cold expression. James, if there's nothing else, please leave. Your first love's current situation has nothing to do with me. Be sensible and stay out of each other's way. Don't come looking for trouble with me. James didn't expect me to ask him to leave. And he angrily slammed the door as he left. I found it both ridiculous and pitiful. After being married for 4 years, this was the first time he lost his temper with me, and it was still because of his first love. My assistant told me that Sophia went to James' office crying, and the latter spent a long time comforting her. To make her happy. James even asked his assistant to book a cruise ship, took her to have Japanese cuisine at noon, and then took her out to sea in the afternoon to relax. The primary requirement for being an assistant is to be tight-lipped. The reason my assistant knew all this was obviously that someone wanted her to hear it. James said he didn't have a sense of ceremony. On my birthday and our wedding anniversary, all I got was a bunch of flowers, a meal, and a gift chosen by an assistant. When I was sick, he just took me to the hospital and then went back to the company to deal with business. Whether he loved me or not had always been obvious. While I was calculating my property, I was also preparing a divorce agreement and a letter of resignation. The company belonged to James, and I was just a department manager. As long as I resigned, I could take what was mine. When I appeared in James' office, Sophia was leaning in his arms, and their behavior was so intimate that they seemed to be kissing. I coldly scolded. What are you doing? Sophia was startled, like a frightened rabbit, and immediately jumped away. She shrank back with a pale face, Batatsu, and her voice was trembling. Sorry, just now something got in my eyes, and James was helping me. She lowered her head with tears in her eyes. You to talk. I'll go out first. But James pulled her to sit beside him and said gently, I asked you to come in. Don't be afraid. After saying that, he turned his head and glared at me, looking impatient. What's the matter? I looked at him. Aren't you going to explain this to me? He raised his eyebrows, looking impatient. As you can see, it's working hours now, and I have some official business to discuss with my new secretary. If you're just being jealous, then let me explain. I'm going to take Sophia to have Japanese cuisine soon. I'm going on a cruise in the afternoon to relax. Do you want to come? James was deliberately trying to pick a fight with me. But he didn't know that someone had already leaked his itinerary in advance. I blinked my eyes and handed over the documents. This is the financial statement for this month. Sign it if there's no problem. Then I looked at my watch. The sun will set at 3 o'clock today. Have lunch early, or it will be quite cold by the seaside without the sun. I glanced at Sophia. After all, you're not in good health and are prone to getting sick. James' face darkened even more. He didn't even look at the documents and quickly signed his name. When he threw the documents back to me, he gritted his teeth in anger. Is that all right? Have a good time. Back in my office, I saw the signed divorce agreement. Tears welled up like a kite with a broken string. It turned out that getting a divorce could be this painful, so painful that it was hard to breathe. I held on until the last minute of work, and then packed up my things from the company and went home. I really wasn't in the mood today. I bought a bowl of porridge on the way back. Although I had decided to leave, after watching my husband and his first love go on a sweet outing all afternoon, I was still feeling miserable. There was no news from James on the social media. But Sophia was updating in real time. Bathed in the sunshine and sea breeze with the one I love. The words were short, but they were like knives stabbing at my heart. She posted a total of 5 sets of 9 square grid pictures. In each picture, although there was no frontal view, they showed intimacy from various angles. Just one outing. And the intimate photos could outweigh the 4 years I had spent with James. When they came back, I was having porridge. Sophia looked surprised. Why are you having porridge? It has no nutrition. As she spoke, she took out several takeout boxes. There were sashimi, cooked food, and a cold and tough steak. Miss Emma, I'll be disturbing you more often in the future. This is just a small token of my appreciation. I hope you won't mind. Mind? Of course I minded. Why should I eat the leftovers they had? All these things had appeared in Sophia's social media posts. I casually threw them into the trash can. Mima. James issued a warning. Miss Emma. Sophia had tears in her eyes and looked extremely aggrieved. Don't you like these foods? She squatted down and took those dishes out of the trash can again, saying cautiously, if you don't like them, I can prepare something else for you. I can take these to the stray cats and dogs. It's getting dark, and it's going to rain tonight. They won't be able to find food. She squatted on the ground and first picked up the boxes. For those that had fallen out, she picked them up one by one and put them back into the lunch boxes. Every time she bent over, several tears would fall on the back of her hand. The warm white light made her thin figure look extremely frail. It was one thing for her to play the innocent act at the company, but she was doing it again in my home. I was so angry that I was shaking. I threw all the things in her hands into the trash can again. Disgusting. You're extremely hypocritical. Stop pretending in front of me. I won't fall for your tricks. Sophia tightly grasped the hem of her clothes and looked at me with teary eyes. Miss Emma, you really have misunderstood me. This is the best I can offer within my current ability. I can understand if you don't like me, but the cats and dogs are innocent. She hugged the food and cried as if I had caused her a great deal of grievance. James couldn't stand it anymore. He took a few big steps forward, pushed me aside, and hugged Sophia in his arms. I stumbled backward and instinctively reached out to steady myself, but I ended up falling onto the tea table. He looked at me coldly, his eyes full of disgust and distance. It was as if I was just a stranger. What you look down on is the best that Sophia can offer. To please you, she could only taste a little of each thing and was thinking of bringing them back to you all the time. Where do you get the right to insult her? You're just born into a good family. Without your parents, you'd be a worthless person. I've been tolerant enough of you. You'd better stop pushing your luck. I stood there. The heating in the room was very warm, but I felt cold all over. It turned out that James could be so sharp when speaking up for his love. It seemed that he had forgotten the nights I had stayed up with him during the major integration of James' group in the early days of our relationship, and the connections I had run around to establish for him. James softly comforted Sophia. Just treat this as your own home. You can order the servants in the house as you like. You don't have to deliberately please anyone. You're also the mistress of this house. I looked at them and silently got up and left. I was still here. But he said that his first love was the mistress of the house. Then what am I? Well, forget it. I'll endure it for a few more days. Once the formalities are completed, I'll leave. I couldn't fall asleep all night. Early the next morning, I had just fallen asleep when James came up with Sophia. The sunlight shone on him through the window. But when his handsome face turned towards me, it was as cold as ice. Sophia had nightmares all night. This room has been blessed for safety. Let her sleep here. His tone was cold and brooked no argument. I was born in the middle of the night. When I was a child, I was often in poor health. My grandmother said that I had an yin constitution and would always attract in clean things. She would get a safety amulet for my room every year. I don't know if it really worked. But before she passed away, my grandmother repeatedly told me that I must get one every year. So on the first day of the first lunar month every year, I would invite a master to come and bring blessings for safety. It wasn't just for myself. It was also to fulfill my grandmother's last wish in heaven. James knew this. James stared at me with piercing eyes. You've been living a life of luxury since you were a child. This is just an ordinary room to you. What's the significance of it? What was the significance to me? It was my bridal chamber. It was my expectation of love. It was my yearning for marriage. It was for the master of the house. Well, forget it. I said, you're right. His expression turned gloomy. Suddenly, he raised his hand, tore off the safety pendant behind the door, and threw it to the ground. The person is already dead, yet ye still keep this thing. It's bad luck. I looked down at the fallen safety pendant, squatted down and picked it up one by one. It didn't matter anymore. I couldn't take these things with me when I got divorced anyway. I said softly, you're right. He was angry at my perfunctory attitude and sneered. Sophia should have been the one to accompany me for a lifetime. You don't have the right to be jealous of her since you got the position of my wife. I replied numbly. I know. I'll make room for her. Let's get a divorce. He really loved Sophia. The room was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard. Are you threatening me? Now it's your Emma family begging me not to divorce, not the time when I was begging you. Yes. Now he had become powerful. I threw everything into the trash can. Broken things should be thrown into the trash can. And so should people who have changed their hearts. It's the Emma family begging you. Seeing that I was being unusually cooperative today, Jane's expression softened. Just leave the cleaning to the servants. Move out quickly. This matter ends here. I perfunctorily hooked the corners of my lips and replied, okay. There was still one day left before Sophia officially moved in. The familiar ornaments in the villa were really being replaced one by one. Even the lilies I liked in the back garden had been pulled out and replaced with the roses that Sophia liked. The language of roses was, I love you every day. When I married him 4 years ago, the villa was empty. From the large-scale decoration to the small details of the garden, every plant and tree was designed by me personally. James said he was busy. He left everything to me. I thought that was respect. But when I saw that James didn't go to the company and instead accompanied Sophia to the furniture city and the flower and bird market, I couldn't deceive myself anymore. I opened the window and Sophia stood in front of the rose garden, looking up at me. She smiled gently and said, Miss Emma, what do you think of the rose varieties that James chose for me? She stood in the middle of the rose garden, wearing a t-shirt and jeans, but with a veil on her head. Standing in the sunlight, she seemed to be waiting for her new husband to come and hold her hand. Her eyes were full of provocation. On our wedding day, James will fill the entire wedding venue with the sea of roses to make up for the past 4 years. She asked provocatively. Did you have anything like that when you got married? I said, you're not a first-time bride either. James is a prominent figure. For him to marry a divorced woman, you'd better keep a low profile. Otherwise, he'll lose face. Her smile froze, her face instantly turned pale, her lips moved, but she couldn't say anything. Tears welled up in her eyes and streamed down one by one. I don't know when James appeared on the other side of the rose garden. The way he looked at me was as if his eyes were poisoned. Emma, if I divorce you, you'll also become a divorced woman to be laughed at. We're both women, but you have no empathy at all. Sophia was just joking with you. She was even persuading me to treat you well last night. She decided not to move in to affect our relationship. I was still hesitating before, but seeing your attitude. Sophia will move in early tomorrow morning. And I want you to help her move things personally. If you dare to refuse, I'll divorce you. Clearly, Sophia was deliberately trying to provoke me. He only had eyes for her. I stood by the windowsill and looked down at him with no change in my expression. Okay. He thought I had compromised and was afraid of getting a divorce from him. He left with Sophia. I leaned against the balcony and wordlessly watched them walk away. Sophia took the initiative to reach out her hand. James didn't hesitate and immediately held her hand with his big hand. I saw her stand on tiptoe and whisper something in James' ear. Sophia turned back and gave me a provocative look. I remained unmoved. Then, James took her hand and they started running. It was like a scene from a movie. The male lead held the hand of the female lead wearing a white veil and they ran towards happiness together. At this moment, I was the mistress who was ruining their relationship. That night, I went home and told my parents about my decision. I thought I would be scolded. After all, in the upper-class business circle, interests were more important than feelings. I was very grateful that my parents supported me. My father said that I should be bold and do as I thought. My mother kept hugging me and crying. You can go abroad. Do you really have to go to a remote mountain village? I heard that there's no signal there, and you can't eat well or dress warmly. You've been living a life of luxury since you were a child. How can you bear it? James also said the same thing. But if you haven't been there, who knows, it's not possible. In the evening, James called me. Sophia is moving in tomorrow morning. Are you deliberately hiding at your parents' house? I said. No, I'll give you an hour to come back. Don't make me go to your parents' house with Sophia to pick you up. With James' current status in the business world, even my father would show him some courtesy. He no longer had the gentle and refined demeanor he used to have when he accompanied me back to my parents' house. I believed he could do what he said. I replied, I'll be back soon. He sneered, that's more like it. After saying goodbye to my parents, I took a taxi back. Unexpectedly, James was actually at the door. When he saw me getting out of the taxi, his face turned so gloomy that it seemed to drip water. Why didn't you drive the car I gave you? It was a customized car he gave me on our first wedding anniversary. I would drive it wherever I went. Since that time he lost his composure when he was drunk. I hadn't driven it anymore. I didn't feel like driving today. You haven't driven it for a long time. So, he knew. I nodded slightly. I didn't want to bother finding an excuse. I walked inside. He reached out his hand and blocked my way. Under the streetle twide, there was a hint of helplessness on his face. Rarely did he lower his stance. Sophia won't compete with you for the position. The position of my wife will only be yours. When she recovers, she will move out. The night wind was very cold, making my eyes sting. I looked at him and sighed, I know. Tomorrow, I will welcome her openly. Only then did his furrowed brows relax. All his gestures of goodwill were traceable. The next day, James set out to pick up Sophia before dawn. I also got up. I took a taxi and went straight to the airport, heading for the mountainous area. After a 3-hour flight, I took a 4-hour train. Then I transferred to a bus. 2 hours later, I transferred to a van. After an hour on the winding mountain road, I came to a narrow dirt road. Next, I had to transfer to a motorcycle. Finally, after walking for an hour, I finally arrived at the mountain village where I would teach as a volunteer. It was deep in the mountains with few people around. There was no internet access. The signal was also poor. Except for going to the village entrance every week to send my parents a message to let them know I was safe. I spent the rest of the time with the children. Although it was very poor here, Everyone was very simple and kind. During the day, I teach the children knowledge at school. After school, the children take me up the mountain to herd sheep. Enjoy the scenery, pick flowers together, and catch small fish by the stream. Time passes quickly. Gradually, I keep forgetting those little bits and pieces with James in the past. And they start to become blurry. The pain in the position of my left atrium is also disappearing. In the long and lonely nights, the person I was waiting for never came. Everything is gone with the wind. It feels like a lifetime ago. Another new year comes. My mother calls me. Haven't you let go of him in 2 years? I was taken aback for a moment and then said honestly. I'm thinking about the children in the mountainous area. My mother clearly didn't believe me and said helplessly. He has been looking for you everywhere in these 2 years. It seems that he hasn't let go of you. If I interrupted her. There's no if. Teacher Emma, my father caught a wild rabbit on the mountain and asked me to bring it to you. I like eating rabbit meat, but I don't know how to cook it. I frowned. But I don't know how either. Come to my house. My mother can cook it. I quickly hung up the phone. Mom, I'm going to eat rabbit meat. I never thought that one day James would be less important to me than a wild rabbit. At 10 o'clock in the morning. James brings Sophia back. He is in a hurry to go to Emma's door, wanting to explain that he didn't really want her to help with moving things. Those were just angry words. Letting Sophia move in was just to make up for the debt he owed her. In the 4 years of their marriage, it seems that he only knew how to talk to her in cold words. At this moment, James is filled with regret. He regrets saying those indifferent and hurtful words that stabbed her heart again and again. No one answers the door. He goes to the living room. Only the aunt is cleaning. Where's the mistress? The nanny finds it strange because the master has never taken the initiative to ask about the mistress's whereabouts. She tells the truth. The mistress went out with some things early this morning. His heart tightens. Where did she go? To the Emma family's house. Yesterday he actually wanted Emma to come home. But what he said was asking her to come back to help Sophia move. Before she came back he was hesitating and waiting at the door, afraid that she would be angry and not come home. On the other hand, he was also struggling with what kind of attitude he should use to pick her up from the Emma family's house. It was not until he saw her figure that his brows finally relaxed. But when he saw her getting out of the taxi, his face turned terribly gloomy. Some time ago, he found that Emma's car was covered in dust, and he asked the butler. The butler said that she hadn't driven for a long time. He didn't take it seriously at that time. At this moment, he feels very uneasy in his heart. Then he denies this thought. Emma loves him so much. How could she leave him? When he came back last night, he went to bed early. In the morning he didn't ask Emma to go with him to help Sophia move things. He had already shown her with his actions that it was just a joke. James is very flustered. He ignores Sophia and rushes to the guest room, pushing the door open. The room is so neatly arranged that it makes people feel flustered, as if no one has ever lived in it. On the dressing table, there is a wedding ring. She used to wear it every day of the year, but now it has been taken off. James' heart instantly sinks into the abyss, and a pain that makes it hard to breathe comes from his chest. She really wants to leave him. James stumbles and rushes to the garage. The car he gave her is parked there intact. She said that she would drive it wherever she went. Sophia hastily drops the things and chases after him, with tears blurring her makeup. James, please don't leave me behind. She has just reached the door and hasn't officially moved in yet. This is something she has been looking forward to for many years. But she can only watch helplessly as James' car disappears from her sight. Her body collapses on the steps. James rushes to the Emma family's house. Miss parents only say one sentence, telling him to go to the company. James runs several red lights all the way and comes to the company. At this time, Mo's assistant is already waiting for him. James, Emma said this is your share. James looks at the signed divorce agreement and suddenly remembers the day he took Sophia to the cruise ship to relax. May came with the documents to sign. Because they had a bad quarrel, he didn't want her to misunderstand anymore and just wanted her to leave quickly. He didn't even look at the content of the documents and sign directly. He covers his face with both hands, and tears slide down through his fingers. His mind goes blank. The painful sobs are heartbreaking. Only at this moment does he understand. Sophia is just an obsession from his youth that he couldn't let go of. He always thought that he and Emma were just in a marriage alliance and had no emotional foundation. He didn't love her, so he distanced himself from her. He just didn't dare to admit that after getting a long day and night, he had already fallen deeply in love with her. At this moment, James finally understands that without Emma, his life will lose all its color. Returning to the city again is on the New Year's Day 4 years later. I didn't want to come back at first. But my mother cried and asked me, because of a relationship, are you going to abandon your parents who gave birth to you and raised you? At first, it was because of the relationship. But later, I really couldn't bear to leave those children. But my mother said, during the spring festival, other families are all reunited. Are you really heartless enough to let your parents sit alone until dawn? My mother was exaggerating a bit. But she really missed me. My parents are very happy to see me back. My mother hugs me and cries just like before. My father's eyes are red. As long as you're happy, I won't interfere with you anymore. James comes to visit on New Year's Eve. In the 4 years since I left, he hasn't made things difficult for my parents. And he has taken the initiative to bring projects for my father to choose from. He is wearing casual clothes and a red scarf. I can tell at a glance that it's the one I gave him on Christmas in the first year we were together. After not seeing him for a few years, he has become much thinner. The edge he used to have has faded, and now he is like a deep pool of water, calm and without waves. When I see him again, I am unusually calm. He is carrying a lot of gifts in both hands. Before opening the door, my father reminds me, business is business. Don't make it too ugly on the surface. I politely take his New Year's gift and look at him calmly. Happy New Year, James. His voice is hoarse. Emma. The divorce agreement wasn't what I really wanted. I never thought of divorcing you. I look at him steadily and say calmly, James. You didn't want a divorce. But you brought your first love to the home that you and I shared. His brows are furrowed. And there is sadness in his eyes. He tries to explain. I just wanted to make up for the hurt I caused Sophia. I always thought that we were just in a marriage alliance and I didn't have true feelings for you. It wasn't until you left. Late affection is cheaper than grass. My tone is indifferent. I could tolerate that you didn't love me. I had the confidence to melt your heart as a stone. But I can't accept that you hurt me again and again because of Sophia. Now we have been divorced for 4 years. All that happened in the past, who was right and who was wrong, has no meaning anymore. My father asked me to invite you in for tea. If it's about business, that's okay. But if it's because of me, please take these things back, and don't come to find me again. His face suddenly turned pale, his lips trembled slightly, and he managed to utter a few words with deep sorrow. Ma, I came here especially to ask for your forgiveness. Now we are already strangers. The word forgiveness is too heavy. I return the gift and close the door. This door is like the boundary between two worlds. There will be no more intersection between me and James. The next day, my mother brings me milk and tells me that James has been standing downstairs looking at my window and refuses to leave. My father has persuaded him 3 times. Even when it starts to rain, he still doesn't leave. It's not until Sophia comes and cries and begs him to go back. On the first day of the Lunar New Year, I accompany my mother to a party. They are all my mother's familiar friends. I feel bored, so I go for a walk alone. I don't expect to see Sophia blocked in the restroom. She looks pale, cornered and wronged. Several wealthy young ladies are mockingly taunting her wantonly. After listening to the whole thing, the main idea is that they say she is like a dog by Sophia's side. As a divorced woman, she tried every means to squeeze out the wife of James, but still didn't succeed in taking the position. Vulgar, shameless, slut. Such unpleasant words were heard continuously. When they got really worked up, Sophia was splashed with wine. In such an occasion, without James giving her the confidence, she could only endure it. I saved her. Sophia looked at me with a resentful expression. I'm in this situation today all because of you. It's been for years. She still hasn't succeeded in taking the position. Yet she's blaming me. If you hadn't disappeared suddenly, James wouldn't have realized that he loves you. In these past few years, I wouldn't have been despised by him either. I rubbed my forehead. My temples were aching terribly. I got a divorce to make room for you. You didn't succeed, yet you're blaming me? Her eyes were wide with anger. If it weren't for your playing hard to get, James wouldn't have been so lost. Don't be too proud either. If you weren't the daughter of the Emma family, he would definitely despise you just like he despises me. I asked. Is there only my wealthy family in the world? Moreover, with James' current status in the business world, does he still need to rely on the woman's family? Is it possible that he really doesn't love you anymore? These words left her speechless for a moment, and she clearly looked guilty. But she refused to admit it. We were each other's first loves. And he loves me. Since that's the case, why is he still publicly known as divorced and single? And for years, he should have given you marriage already. Well, what can I say? Actually, I can't bring myself to hate Sophia. It was her appearance that made me realize that James wasn't someone I could entrust my life to. Now, I've already gotten through that excruciating pain. Looking at Sophia is like looking at myself who used to numb my reason. Have you ever thought about living a different life? At least, don't regard a man as your whole world. Since I've said this much, there's no point in saying more. When I left, Sophia didn't say anything either. Just kept wiping her tears. On the way home, my mother said that several wealthy ladies wanted to introduce someone to me. I know this circle too well. I'm divorced and not young anymore. Excellent men look down on me, and I look down on older men. I said directly, there are quite a lot of successful women nowadays. Being a female I'm so good. I don't have to be someone else's stepmother. Right? My mother understood. When she mentioned it to my father at home, my father was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth and kept shouting that he wanted me to join the company the next day and study quickly because he wanted to retire early. As soon as I entered the business world, I was extremely busy. In an instant, it made me feel like I was back in those days when I accompanied James to strive for success. But this time, I'm doing it for myself. James often comes to me on the pretext of work. But every time, he doesn't talk about work. He knows that I don't lack material things, so he starts taking the warm heart route. Today it's a bowl of loving porridge. Tomorrow it's a loving bento. The day after tomorrow it's Thai food. And the day after that it's Japanese cuisine. He can always guess what I want to eat on that day. Now, our roles have been reversed. I no longer wait for him to come home for dinner every day. However, I no longer cherish this kind of occasional favor. So I gave my assistant a warning letter. Do you want me to introduce you to work at James' place? She panicked. I was wrong. I won't reveal anything anymore. I'll give you one last chance. Don't let him in when you see him coming in with food. Yes. After being rejected several times, James only came to me for work-related matters and didn't bother me anymore. But I didn't expect that Sophia would come to find me. She had lost a lot of weight and looked extremely haggard. It was cold outside, so I still let her into my office and asked my assistant to give her a cup of hot coffee. With tears in her eyes, she apologized. I'm sorry for you in the first place. Without me, you and James wouldn't have gotten a divorce. Maybe. But what's past is past. There's no point in talking about it anymore. I had a calm expression and handed her a pack of tissues to wipe her tears. She said that after I left, James never touched her again. Now he just transfers money to her card on time and won't even let her see him. When he sees her, he only feels disgusted. She has more than enough money now, but she's living under so much pressure. She feels that she's sick. Yet she can't tell what's wrong with her. I just listened. But I couldn't say a word of comfort. Our relationship is indeed an awkward one. Finally, she was tired of talking. Then she cried and asked me, "Ma, if I step aside, will you choose James again?" I shook my head. "There are plenty of men in the world." She looked at me in surprise. There was great astonishment in her eyes. She couldn't believe that I could be so free and easy. But then she let out a sigh of relief as if a burden had been lifted. "Thank you for giving him back to me." I remained silent. So, she still doesn't understand James. He's like a wolf. A wolf that can't be tamed and is full of ambition. Once he stops loving, he won't love again. I understand this. Sophia doesn't. She always thinks that James is like this now because of me. A year later, James officially announced his relationship with the daughter of a jeweler family. I heard that before the wedding, Sophia caused a big scene. As a result, James called the security guards and they mercilessly threw her out. And he also stopped her card. 3 days later, I received a package from Sophia. There were only a few short sentences. "You were right. He really doesn't love me anymore. You were right. I shouldn't have regarded him as my whole world. But I realized it too late." At the end, she drew a picture of someone bowing as an apology to me. "I'm really sorry for you." I wrote back to her. "It's never too late as long as you can wake up in time." Unfortunately, there was no recipient for this letter. Because Sophia committed suicide. James and his wife are just using each other. I heard that they're just acting for show with each other. At a business party, I overheard people talking. I heard that James caught his wife cheating. Not only did his wife not think she was wrong, but she also openly said that a business marriage alliance doesn't need love or loyalty, only money. She even threatened to send women to James. James was furious. I no longer have any feelings for this matter. I turned around and left. Unexpectedly, I bumped into the person being gossiped about at the corner. His eyes were red. "Uma." Just then, my phone rang. I took out my phone and avoided his attempt to hold my hand. "Wait for me. I'll come down right away." Perhaps the happy smile on my face stung him. His eyes were bloodshot. "I heard that you're in a relationship." I raised my hand. There was a brand new ring on my ring finger. "James, I'm married."